I've been lurking on this sub for a while, reading other people's messes and miracles, and I keep thinking, yeah, I've got one of those. Probably more than one. I'm not proud of it, and I'm not here fishing for sympathy. I'm just at a point in my life where the memories are louder than the justifications, and writing feels cheaper than therapy. So here it is, one of the crimes I committed, told straight from my side of the table. This happened years ago, back when I thought being smart was the same thing as being untouchable. I was broke, impatient, and convinced the world owed me something for all the potential I had never cashed in. Casinos, to me, were temples built on math and human weakness. I didn't see them as victims. I saw them as puzzles with bright lights and bad odds, daring someone arrogant enough to try. The motive wasn't desperation, not exactly. I had a job. I paid rent. But I also had debt, a bruised ego, and a habit of turning every problem into a game I needed to win. The idea of beating a casino, of walking out with their money and my heart still hammering, felt like proof that I was sharper than the rest of the room. That's the lie I told myself, anyway. I want to be clear about something up front. This wasn't a single impulsive night fueled by free drinks and bad decisions. This was a choice I circled for months. Every time I drove past that casino, every time I heard dice on felt or cards snapping on a table, the thought came back, I could do it. I could really do it. And eventually, that thought stopped being a fantasy and started becoming a plan. That's where this story really begins, not at the table, not with security breathing down my neck, but with me realizing I was willing to risk jail just to feel clever for a few hours. Once the thought crossed that invisible line from what if to I will, everything else in my life started orbiting around it. I'd be at work pretending to listen to meetings while my brain replayed casino floors I'd walked through years earlier. Colors, sounds, rhythms. The way people stopped thinking the moment money hit the table. I wasn't obsessed with money as much as I was obsessed with systems, and casinos are nothing but systems pretending to be fun. I told myself I wasn't doing anything new. That people had been exploiting weaknesses in gambling forever. That the house always cheats first, so I'd just be evening things out. It sounds ridiculous now, but at the time it felt logical. Moral, even. Like I was stealing bread instead of outsmarting cameras and pit bosses. I started small, mentally. No big movie-style score. No disguises or fake names. Just one table, one night, one clean exit. I convinced myself the real crime would be arrogance, staying too long. My plan, in theory, was all about restraint. In reality, restraint has never been my strong suit. What scared me wasn't getting caught, it was getting it wrong. Misreading a situation. Trusting the wrong instinct. Casinos are built to make you doubt yourself, and I knew that if I hesitated, even for a second, I'd fold. So the idea hardened. I stopped asking should I? And started asking how clean can I make it? I didn't tell anyone. That part mattered to me. Saying it out loud would have made it real in a way I couldn't control. Secrets feel powerful when they're still warm, still forming. I carried this one around like a loaded coin in my pocket, flipping it over and over in my head, waiting for the night I'd finally let it land. By the end of that week, I wasn't daydreaming anymore. I was committing, quietly, internally, to becoming the kind of person who crosses lines and then lives with it. And once you accept that about yourself, the rest starts falling into place faster than you expect. This is the part where people usually expect some slick, technical breakdown. I'm not going to give that. Not because I'm trying to be noble, but because the truth is messier and less impressive. Preparation, for me, wasn't about mastering some secret trick, it was about learning how not to stand out. I spent weeks just watching. Sitting at tables without playing much. Ordering cheap drinks. Losing small, boring amounts of money on purpose. I paid attention to rhythms, how often dealers changed, how long security hovered before getting bored, how players reacted when luck turned sour. Casinos run on patterns, and the real preparation was teaching myself to blend into them. I practiced at home, too, but not in the way movies make it look. No dramatic rehearsals. Mostly mental reps, running scenarios through my head late at night. What if someone notices? What if I misjudge the moment? What if I went too fast? I learned that the danger wasn't doing something wrong. It was doing something too right. The hardest part was preparing myself emotionally. I had to flatten my reactions, dull my tells. I trained myself to lose convincingly in my imagination. To sigh at the right moments. To look bored when something went my way. You don't realize how expressive you are until you're trying to erase it. I also planned my exit before I ever planned the crime itself. That mattered more than anything. I told myself I'd walk away the moment my hands started shaking or my thoughts sped up. I wrote that rule in my head like a commandment. Of course, rules are easiest to respect before adrenaline enters the room. By the time the night came, I didn't feel excited. That surprised me. I felt calm, almost blank. Like I'd already crossed the line in my mind, and the rest was just logistics. That should have been my warning sign, but I was too busy congratulating myself for how, in control, I felt to listen to it. The night I chose wasn't special. That was deliberate. No holidays, no big events, no packed house that would make everything feel frantic. Just a steady hum of activity, the kind where nobody remembers faces because there are too many of them. I dressed like I always did, nothing flashy, nothing sloppy. The goal was to look forgettable, like someone security would struggle to describe 5 minutes later. Walking through the doors hit me harder than I expected. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. Every sound felt sharper. Chips clacking, slot machines chiming like broken doorbells, laughter that sounded half real. I remember thinking how absurd it was that all of this existed just to separate people from their money, and how ironic it felt that I was there to reverse the flow, even temporarily. I took a lap first. That was part of my routine. Bathrooms, exits, security desks, nothing suspicious, just familiarizing myself. My heart rate stayed steady, which I took as a good sign. I ordered a drink I didn't really want and let it sit untouched. That, too, was intentional. I wanted my hands busy, my presence justified. When I finally sat down at the table, I felt something click into place. Like slipping into a role I'd rehearsed internally 100 times. I wasn't William with a plan anymore. I was just another guy killing time, making small talk, pretending luck mattered. The dealers smiled the same smile they give everyone. The players barely noticed me. That's when it really sank in. Nobody was watching me the way I'd imagined. Not yet. And that realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant I could proceed. Terrifying because it meant the only thing standing between me and disaster was my own judgment. I told myself to breathe. To remember the rules I'd set. To treat this like a story I was already planning to leave early. And with that, I placed my first bet, not with confidence, not with fear, but with the quiet certainty that there was no turning back once my chips touched the felt. The first few rounds were intentionally dull. I played like someone who didn't care whether they won or lost, which, ironically, takes effort. I let opportunities pass. I made a couple of mistakes on purpose. Nothing big, just enough to look human, fallible. The kind of player dealers forget as soon as the next hand is dealt. Inside, though, everything was loud. My senses were turned up too high, like I'd adjusted the contrast on reality. I noticed the way the dealer tapped the table between actions, the way a guy 2 seats down kept rubbing his thumb against his chip stack when he got nervous. I noticed how quickly time warped, minutes stretching, then snapping back into place. When I finally nudged the plan forward, it felt almost anticlimactic. No dramatic moment. No swelling music. Just a quiet decision layered onto 100 smaller ones. That's the thing nobody tells you. Crimes like this don't announce themselves. They creep. They hide inside routine. There was a flicker of doubt right then. A tiny voice asking if I was sure, if this was really worth it. I shut it down fast. Doubt is contagious, and I couldn't afford it. I reminded myself that preparation was already done, that backing out now would just leave me with regret and an empty wallet. Around me, nothing changed. The casino kept breathing the same way it always did. A waitress laughed at something a patron said. Someone at a nearby table cursed under their breath. Normalcy wrapped itself around what I was doing, and that almost made it easier. If the world wasn't reacting, why should I? By the time I saw the first real sign that things were going my way, my pulse finally jumped. Just a beat faster, just enough to remind me I was still human. I told myself to stay boring, to stay small. But deep down, something else had woken up, the part of me that loves risk not for the reward, but for the feeling of standing on the edge and not falling. There's a moment in situations like this where you realize the balance has shifted. Not dramatically, no alarms, no gasps, but subtly, like the room leaning an inch in your favor. I felt it before I saw it. A tightening in my chest. A warmth behind my eyes. The sense that I was no longer just participating, but interfering. Money started moving my direction. Slowly enough not to look suspicious, fast enough to make my brain light up. I kept my reactions muted, just like I practiced, but inside I was buzzing. Adrenaline has a way of convincing you that you're calm while it quietly rewires your priorities. I told myself I was still in control. I told myself I could stop any time. Other players noticed, of course. Not me specifically, but the shift in energy. Someone joked about hot streaks. Someone else rolled their eyes. The dealer stayed neutral, professional, but I caught a brief glance, nothing accusatory, just awareness. That was the first crack in my confidence. Awareness cuts both ways. I reminded myself not to rush. Rushing is how people get remembered. I took pauses. I checked my phone. I pretended to second-guess decisions that were already made in my head. It felt like walking a tightrope while pretending you were just strolling down a sidewalk. The strangest part was how normal I felt while doing something that could have changed my life permanently for the worse. That normality was dangerous. It made the risk feel abstract, like jail was something that happened to other people in other stories. I was still telling myself this was temporary. Controlled. Contained. But as the chips stacked higher, the truth crept in. The plan was working, and that scared me more than if it hadn't. Because success introduces a new problem: deciding when enough is actually enough. Confidence has a smell. I didn't notice it on myself, but other people did. The guy to my left leaned over and asked where I was from, like geography might explain what was happening. Another player joked that I should start charging for luck. I laughed it off, kept my answers short. Conversation is a trap when you're trying to stay invisible. That's when the first real complication showed up. Not security, not a dealer switch, but attention. Friendly, casual attention. The kind that feels harmless until you realize it anchors people's memories. Faces stick when stories get attached to them, and I was accidentally becoming a story. I tried to cool things down. Changed my pacing. Took a bathroom break I didn't need. When I came back, the table felt different, like it was watching me instead of the cards. Paranoia maybe, but paranoia exists for a reason. Casinos thrive on noticing deviations, and even small ones can ripple outward. The dealer rotated. New face, new rhythm. That always resets the board in subtle ways. I adjusted, telling myself this was still within expectations, still manageable. But my hands were a little slick now. My thoughts moved faster. I could feel the rules I'd set earlier starting to blur around the edges. I considered walking away right then. I really did. I even stacked my chips neatly, like someone preparing to cash out. But then someone placed a bet, the game moved on, and I stayed seated. It's amazing how easy it is to override your better judgment when momentum is on your side. That was the turning point, whether I knew it or not. The moment where this stopped being about proving I could do it, and started being about seeing how far I could go. And once that shift happens, the risk doesn't just increase, it changes shape, becoming something harder to recognize until it's already too late. It wasn't a siren or a tap on the shoulder that set me off. It was a look. A small one. Easy to miss if you weren't already wound tight. One of the pit bosses stopped near the table, not hovering, not staring, just standing in that casual way that isn't casual at all. Arms relaxed. Eyes doing math. My stomach dropped, then immediately tried to pretend it hadn't. I told myself this was normal. Pit bosses roam. That's literally their job. Still, my internal monologue went from confident narration to rapid-fire damage control. Don't change anything. Don't rush. Don't freeze. I became painfully aware of every movement I made, which only made me feel more artificial. The table chatter died down a bit. Not completely, but enough to notice. The kind of silence where people start listening to the room instead of each other. I could feel my pulse in my throat, and for the first time that night, the idea of jail stopped being abstract. I pictured fluorescent lights, concrete floors, explaining this to my parents. The fantasy cracked. Something small went wrong, not catastrophic, just imperfect. A moment where timing felt off. Nobody reacted, but I felt it. That's the curse of knowing you're skating on thin ice. Every sound feels like a crack. I debated bailing immediately. Standing up, cashing out, vanishing into the parking lot like smoke. But fear does weird things to logic. Part of me thought leaving right then would look worse. Another part insisted staying was suicide. I split the difference, which is almost always the wrong choice. So I stayed. Shorter stack. Lower profile. Telling myself I was managing the situation when really I was just afraid to make a decisive move. That hesitation, that wobble, was the moment the night stopped being a story I controlled and started becoming one that could control me. Once you think you're being watched, the room gains mass. Every glance feels heavier, every sound louder. I could feel the casino pressing in on me, like the air had thickened. The pit boss drifted away, but the impression lingered, a phantom pressure between my shoulder blades. I focused on acting normal, which is a funny thing to try to do consciously. Normal is instinct. The second you have to perform it, you're already off script. I cracked a joke at the table that landed flat. Took a sip of that now warm drink. My hands stopped shaking, but only because they'd gone numb. Something unexpected happened then, a small loss. Nothing dramatic, just enough to break the rhythm. Relief washed over me first, balance restored, followed immediately by panic. Loss meant scrutiny could ease, but it also tempted me to correct things. That's how traps work. They make you think you're choosing. I noticed security walking by, not stopping, just passing. But I catalogued it anyway. My brain was filing evidence against myself, building a case that didn't exist yet. I wondered if I could talk my way out if it came to that, and hated myself for thinking it. Innocent people don't rehearse explanations. The table shifted again. New bets, new hands, new outcomes. I kept telling myself I was winding down, that I was seconds from standing up. But seconds stretched. Each round felt like a small negotiation with fate, just one more, then I'm done. That's when I realized something unsettling. I wasn't chasing money anymore. I was chasing relief. The kind that comes from ending a story without consequences. And the longer I stayed, the more expensive that relief was becoming. It happened fast enough that I didn't fully process it until afterward. A dealer pause. Just a second too long. Hands still, eyes flicking up toward the pit. Not alarmed, alert. Professional. The kind of micro-moment that means something registered. My chest tightened. I felt heat rush into my face and had to fight the urge to look around like a guilty kid. Instead, I forced myself to stay still, to breathe, to let my expressions sag into mild boredom. Inside, though, my thoughts were sprinting. Is this it? Did I push too far? Did someone finally connect the dots? The pit boss came closer this time. Close enough that I could smell his cologne. He didn't say anything at first, just watched a round play out. I could feel his presence like a hand hovering inches above my shoulder, not touching, but reminding me it could. He asked the dealer a routine question. Something procedural. I don't even remember what it was. I remember nodding along like it concerned me, even though it didn't. I remember thinking how surreal it was that my future might hinge on a sentence spoken in a calm, customer service tone. For a split second, I considered bolting. Standing up mid-round, consequences be damned. The urge was primal. But I stayed seated, because running is the loudest confession there is. So I did nothing. I let the moment pass through me like a wave I couldn't dodge. Eventually, the pit boss stepped back. Drifted away. The dealer resumed their rhythm. The table exhaled, and only then did I realize I'd been holding my breath. I told myself that was the warning. The final one. The universe tapping the glass and saying, "Cash out now." My hands shook as I stacked my chips, not neatly this time, but quickly. Whatever thrill I'd been chasing was gone, replaced by a single, overwhelming need to leave without being stopped. Standing up felt unnatural, like breaking a spell. My legs were stiff, my balance off just enough to make me worry someone would notice. I kept my face neutral, eyes unfocused, like I was already thinking about dinner plans or traffic or anything other than the weight of chips in my hands. Cashing out is supposed to be boring. That's the design. Bright counter, polite cashier, numbers flicking across a screen. For me, it felt like a slow-motion sprint. Every second in that line was a chance for a tap on the shoulder, a quiet request to step aside. I rehearsed a dozen responses I hoped I'd never need. The cashier smiled and counted. Once. Twice. The sound of chips stacking down into the tray felt indecently loud. I nodded when I was supposed to, signed where I was told. My signature looked wrong, too sharp, too deliberate, but nobody commented. The receipt slid toward me, ordinary and thin, like it couldn't possibly represent the night I'd just lived. When the cash hit my palm, it didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy. Responsibility heavy. Evidence heavy. I tucked it away and forced myself to walk, not rush, toward the exit. Each step away from the floor loosened something in my chest, but the fear didn't vanish. It followed me, whispering that leaving doesn't mean you're safe, just that you're not caught yet. The doors opened. Cool air hit my face. I kept walking until the sounds dulled, until the lights softened, until I reached my car and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, shaking. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat, listening to my heartbeat slow, realizing how close I'd come to watching my life tilt in a very different direction. I drove off eventually, careful, legal, painfully normal. And with every mile between me and that place, the question got louder: was that the end of it, or just the beginning of the consequences? I thought once I shut my apartment door, the night would collapse into something manageable. That I'd shower, sleep, and wake up lighter. Instead, the silence hit harder than the casino ever did. No noise, no motion, just my thoughts pacing the room like they were waiting for security to catch up. I laid the cash out on the table, counted it twice, then swept it back into the envelope like it might bite me. It didn't feel like money I'd earned. It felt borrowed from a future version of myself who might still have to pay it back. I kept expecting my phone to ring. A knock. Anything to puncture the illusion that I'd made it out clean. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed moments I hadn't noticed before: the pit boss's timing, the dealer's pause, my own hesitation. My brain started rewriting the story with darker endings, inserting scenes where I was stopped, questioned, escorted somewhere without windows. Fear has a creative streak. Over the next few days, I lived on edge. Every unknown number felt like the call. Every official-looking envelope made my stomach drop. I rehearsed explanations I'd never be asked to give. I even looked up lawyers, just in case, then hated myself for how calm that made me feel. Nothing happened. No call. No letter. No consequences I could point to. But that absence didn't bring relief. It brought something worse: permission. The dangerous thought that maybe I could do this again. That maybe the fear was just part of the cost, not a warning. And that's when I realized the crime hadn't ended at the casino. It had followed me home, settled into my routines, and started negotiating terms with my conscience. The weeks that followed were deceptively normal. Bills got paid. Groceries got bought. I went to work, laughed at the right jokes, nodded through conversations. On the surface, nothing had changed. Internally, though, something had shifted its weight. I caught myself replaying the night not with fear anymore, but with edits. Little tweaks. I should have left earlier. I could have handled that moment better. Next time, I'd know what to watch for. That's the real damage of getting away with something. It reframes the memory from a warning into a tutorial. I didn't go back to the casino. Not right away. I told myself that restraint was proof I was still in control. But restraint born from pride isn't the same as restraint born from wisdom. I wasn't avoiding temptation. I was savoring it. Letting the idea age, ferment, grow sharper. The money itself became oddly invisible. I stopped thinking about what it could buy and started thinking about what it represented. Proof. Validation. A private trophy I carried around in my head. I hated that part of myself and fed it anyway, which is a special kind of hypocrisy. Guilt showed up in strange ways. Not as regret, but as irritation. I'd snap at small inconveniences. I'd feel restless in quiet moments. It was like my nervous system had learned a new baseline and found ordinary life understimulating. I touched something dangerous and come back intact, and now my brain wanted that edge again. That's when I understood this wasn't really about casinos or money or even crime. It was about identity. About who I believed I was when nobody stopped me. And that realization scared me more than the pit boss ever did. I wish I could say I walked away clean after that, that the fear outweighed the temptation and turned me into a better person overnight. That's not how it worked. What actually happened was quieter and more dangerous. I started rationalizing a sequel. I'd catch myself doing the math in idle moments. On the train. In the shower. Late at night when my phone was dark and my thoughts had room to stretch out. I told myself I wouldn't repeat the same mistakes. That I'd be quicker next time. Smaller stakes. Less exposure. I framed it as improvement, which is just another word for escalation wearing a suit. The scariest part was how reasonable it all sounded in my own head. I wasn't desperate anymore. I wasn't angry. I was calm, analytical. That's when I realized how close I was to turning this from a story I told into a pattern I lived. One good outcome had almost rewritten my internal rules. What stopped me wasn't morality, at least not directly. It was exhaustion. I noticed how much mental energy that night had taken from me, how jumpy I still was, how thin my patience had become. I saw the cost more clearly then. Not jail or fines or headlines, but the slow erosion of my ability to feel normal without risk. I drove past the casino one evening, months later, and felt that familiar pull tighten in my chest. Instead of turning in, I kept going. My hands shook anyway. That's when it hit me. Walking away wasn't a single decision. It was something I'd have to keep choosing, over and over, without applause or closure. That's when this crime finally started to feel finished, not because I'd paid for it, but because I'd finally admitted what it was doing to me. I'm older now. Not wiser in some dramatic, cinematic way, just more aware of my own blind spots. That night didn't turn me into a villain, but it did strip away a comforting lie, that I was the kind of person who wouldn't cross certain lines. I learned that lines don't disappear. They get negotiated, softened, renamed. And that's how you lose track of where you're standing. I didn't get caught. Not that time. There was no reckoning that arrived with sirens or paperwork. The consequence was quieter and, in some ways, heavier. I had to live with the knowledge that I'd risked everything for a feeling that evaporated the moment I stepped outside. The thrill was real. So was the fear. Neither lasted. What lingered was the question of who I was becoming. If you're reading this and flirting with something similar, cards, dice, shortcuts, systems. Here's my advice, worth exactly what you're paying for it. Don't trust the version of yourself that feels smartest when the stakes are highest. That version is drunk on adrenaline and will sell you confidence on credit. Casinos are designed to exploit that. Life is too. I still tell myself stories about my past. We all do. This one doesn't end with a lesson neatly learned or a moral stamped at the bottom. It ends with a choice I keep making, to stay boring, to stay free, to remember that getting away with something once doesn't mean you escaped. It just means you were given another chance to decide who you want to be. That's my confession. Take it for what it's worth. And if you ever feel the room start to lean in your favor, ask yourself how much you're willing to pay when it leans back.